The Tangent Egg podcast is aimed at a mature audience. It contains themes that are not appropriate for all listeners. It's important to note that we are not experts. We routinely have no idea what we're talking about and are just three idiots sitting around a table. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Tangent podcast. This is a bonus episode, giving an extra one this week. I'm Seth, and I'm here with John Doe and Swoosh, as always.
Hi. G'day.
But today, we're doing this bonus episode because we've got a special guest on. We've got the editor of New Edge Sword and Sorcery, Oliver, here talking to us today.
Hello.
Welcome onto the show, man. We got contacted by you a little while ago, and we were very interested in having you on when we found out that the New Edge Sword and Sorcery magazine that you're producing is a collection of different authors doing short stories. We here at the Tangent podcast read an awful lot of books, so anyone supporting authors is absolutely someone we absolutely love.
Especially indie authors. I love the stuff that pops out of that kind of stuff.
Exactly, yeah.
So, would you like to take it away?
Well, as you learned to your detriment, perhaps, before we started recording, I will go on. So by any point, cut in if you want. But yes, my name is Oliver Brackenbury. I'm the editor, sort of captain of the ship of New Edge Sword and Sorcery magazine, which you can go to newedgeswordandsorcery.com after this if you're like, what did you say? And you can reread about it again. I'm an author, podcaster, trained screenwriter as well. And now I'm taking my crack at this. I have not done a magazine before, but I have made a point of surrounding myself with talent who are familiar with it. My layout and design guy is a guy named Nathan Webb, who unfortunately couldn't join us today, but he's the editor of Windgraph Cozy Fantasy magazine and Raquel Tales of Swashbuckling Adventure magazine. I probably buggered the tagline on that, but you get the idea. I'm a huge evangelist of sword and sorcery as a genre, and part of the reason for this magazine is to help push new sword and sorcery authors and to try and increase the size of the audience, the diversity of the audience, and also the diversity of creators by lifting up people who are frankly not me, white cishet boy talking over here, nothing wrong with that, some of my best friends, etc. But I just, I would like a greater variety of stories being told out there. Think about how fun it was when you went out to see Black Panther and you're like, oh yeah, when Martin Freeman wasn't on the screen. Oh, this is a bit different. I like this,
Yeah.
So, but you could still go see Spider-Man. I'm not taking away the other stuff from you. And so, I've been working really hard the last couple of months with people I've met through the sword and sorcery literature scene to put together a magazine which will feature 6 original short stories by as many authors, each one featuring original black and white illustrations on the inside with each story, as well as an original painted cover. I got so lucky. An artist named Gilead was like, I want to help with this thing. I believe in it. And I was like, my budget is $0. And he went, that's fine. So God bless him.
Nice.
And also a variety of, I forget the exact number right off the top of my head, 5 or 6 non-fiction articles will go in the back. Future issues will probably only have 3, but for this first one, I got lucky and crammed a whole bunch in there, talking about the history of sword and sorcery. Because, it's New Edge, it's going forward, right? But we're not burning what came before. I think that's a false choice when people think you have to choose between the old and the new stories. I say learn from the old stories. And then, if there's some grotty old attitudes in there, leave that behind, but bring forward the good stuff. Like in this case, an interesting eye towards historical secondary worlds, jazzed up with a bit of dark and dangerous weird magic, the bit of Lovecraftian horror, sort of more working class ground up perspective, outsider protagonists, that kind of cool stuff. Bring that forward, leave behind, the 1930s ideas about who's human, and then tell some new exciting tales. And so, you'll learn a bit about the past through our profiles of classic authors from the 20th century, but also read about, the possibilities of what can be done in the genre going forward, as explained by a variety of very smart people who I brought on board and been lucky to work with.
If nothing else, it's going to explode my to-read pile. It's going to be great.
Oh, yeah.
The pile is already shamefully big.
We're really the kind of people who have a problem with the to-read pile getting bigger.
Well, it's hard to judge
pile,
now because my to-read pile is digital. Like I can't see the pile now physically, so it's no longer a threat to crush me in my sleep. So you just keep adding to it. It's fine.
It's fine. Yeah, yeah. No, to read pile, I left that behind years ago. I've got to read shelves. I'm slowly working through.
Yeah.
My to read pile is somewhere next
But
to
that's
my
part
to
of the-
play pile and to watch pile. They're all way too big to ever get a chance to go through.
Yeah, no, one of these days I'm going to get crushed like one of the Collier brothers, those famous hoarders who died under a pile of old newspapers they couldn't get rid of. But but you know what? I mean, that's part of one of the strengths of Sword and Sorcery. You know, I've got nothing against your 500, 600-page phone books and the trilogies, quadrilogies, and so on. But, you know, if you want to break from that, this is a great genre because it is a genre born out of the short fiction, weird pulp magazines of the 1930s. And so, you know, absolutely, there are novels, and there's the odd Sword and Sorcery book that's quite long because there's exceptions to every broad statement. By and large, though, you're going to get, certainly in this magazine, tight 5 to 10,000 word short stories. And, you know, there might be a lot of stories about a character, like the most classic Sword and Sorcery guy of all, Conan, right? Lots of Conan stories. You can pick up any Conan story in any order and enjoy it. If you want more, go out and get more. If you think, oh, that's all right, I want to go try out some other heroes, you're fine because you're not locked in for 400 more pages to know what the hell happened. You've got a complete tale.
Nice, self-contained, complete stories are great. Just to like, as a break between series, I always use them essentially as a palate cleanser. Like, I want something that's just going to be like quick, punchy, and just complete. I'm not going to have to sit there forever. Just reset everything.
Well, reset, or, you know, and this is one thing I love and I'm trying to do with my own novel I'm working on, which is a collection of 17 sort of short stories, but they're stitched together. So it's like you can leap in anywhere, but if you read them in order, you'll get rewarded for it kind of thing. You know, I think about Michael Moorcock, who's still with us, bless him, and has a new Elric book out very soon. His character Elric is kind of one of the big ones, you know, when people talk about the history of the genre. And the Elric stories were written in this style where you could just pick up any chapter practically as a story unto itself, or, you know, a story made up of a couple of short chapters, read it on its own. But if you read more and more of them, you start to see the continuity changes ever so slightly, but in a way that you can immediately know what's going on. So it's like his circumstances might change, and therefore you read another story and his circumstances are different, but that's fine. You just go, oh, okay. He's, you know, I read one story. He's an emperor who's kind of wondering, oh, do I need to leave my people because they all love torture and evil and stuff? And is that bad? And then you might read another story later where it's like years later, he's blown up the city that is, sorry, spoilers, I guess, whatever. It's an old story. You know, you might read a story that is like years later, you know, he's blown up the island his people are on and he's wandering the wastelands and now he's figuring out what to do here. And it's like, you get that in one sentence. It's, oh, okay, that's where we're at. Cool, whatever. And you go on. There's not, like a glossary of 10,000 names that you need to go to refer to or anything like that. Certainly, if there's one thing, like, I mean, people make them for everything, so I'm sure there are wikis for just about every Sword and Sorcery long-running character, but you don't have to refer to them to get what the hell's going on. And so it's this kind of thing where I guess I might come back to this a couple of times in our chat, but I feel like there's a lot of false binaries, you know, false choices people set themselves up for. And like the one I mentioned earlier about, you know, old stories and new stories, read all the stories, you know, and the same thing of like, oh, well, it has to be a total standalone or it has to be a mega saga. And it's like, both of those things are fine if you like them, but you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. You can kind of have a mega saga that is written carefully so that you can pick up any slice of it and enjoy that on its own as a standalone. And I just think that is such strength and so like cool and flexible from both a reading and a writing standpoint. I just think that's really, really fun. And so like with my novel I'm doing, I'm kind of simulating as if I've had a 40-year career and now I'm stitching the stories together into a novel, right? I'm trying to leap ahead in a way. And so I am writing it with a beginning, middle, and an end kind of thing. But yeah. Anyway, sorry, now I'm talking about my book. Well, I want to be talking about this magazine.
At least we didn't stray too far from like literature, because that tends to happen occasionally.
Okay. No. I mean, I'm happy to do so, but I've moderated a lot of talks, and so my instinct is to keep like wrangling it back to the main subject. Apologies in advance.
Generally, the role I have to play on this
it's
one.
somewhat needed.
So we're going to be looking at getting 6 stories, some non-fiction articles. This sounds frankly freaking cool because I remember when I was a lot younger, when I was less patient to read, I tended to actually read a lot of more pulp adventure and Sword and Sorcery. And as I've gotten older, I found it harder to find interesting fiction within that genre unless I look for conglomerates, big packs of stories.
Anthologies and that kind of stuff.
So it sounds very interesting that you're really trying to push this magazine that can start giving a bullhorn to this, because it's, unless you're in the know or at least for someone like me who is very not, it's hard to find good sword and sorcery books to read.
Well, can I give a shout out? Because, I'm adding to something exciting that's happening. Sword and Sorcery had its sort of initial golden age and birth in the 30s, right? With the weird magazines, Conan and Robert E. Howard and Lovecraft and sorry, not Lovecraft, pardon me, he was a contemporary, but Clark Ashton Smith, C.L. Moore. And then it had a big rebirth that lasted quite a while. It was sort of the 60s through 70s through early 80s, at which point, a little after the Conan movie, it kind of started to implode upon itself because it stopped being as innovative. And a lot of people just thought of it as like, sword and sorcery, that's the thing with like the big dumb guy in a fur diaper with a woman with a bare arse over his shoulder. And it's like, we want something different now. Fair. It didn't die entirely. It went very dormant for a while, but there were a few stalwarts, including an author I really like and I've had the privilege to get to know a bit, Howard Andrew Jones, who kept the thing going up through the 2000s. He actually coined the term New Edge Sword and Sorcery. That was his attempt with some other authors in the mid-2000s to kind of rebrand it a little bit, because there was this difficulty twofold. There was the difficulty that Sword and Sorcery had become a diluted term, a difficulty that I think is still there, where we say it to a lot of people, it doesn't mean this sort of grounded historical ground, the thing I described a minute ago. It didn't mean that. It just meant literally anything fantasy. People, especially because marketing kind of diluted it, right? You would see Lord of the Rings called Sword and Sorcery. It bloody isn't. And that's fine. Nothing wrong with Lord of the Rings. I'm just saying it's something else. It's more like high fantasy with like a group of people on a big quest. That's not something you're generally going to find in Sword and Sorcery. And so there was the dilution of the term, and then there was also the unfortunate stigma that carried over from those 80s bad movies and books. And so people were just like, oh, it's kind of stinky if they even recognized it. And so it was a little too early, perhaps, this attempt to get New Edge Sword and Sorcery to take off then didn't quite pan out. But then you fast forward to now, another 15 years go by, and there's a lot more going on in the genre. People have largely kind of forgotten those 80s films. Certainly younger audiences have no clue. And the dilution of the term is still kind of there. But then that's why you want to do things like this, where with Howard's Blessing, I'm using the term as the name of the magazine. Doesn't mean I'm the king of it. Doesn't mean I go around telling people what qualifies as New Edge or not, even if I wanted to. I mean, how would I do that? It's kind of like fantasy and science fiction magazine. They do not claim sovereignty over all of fantasy and science fiction, by God, any more than I do with this. So to me, it's like New Edge Sword and Sorcery, it is a certain kind of thing, an expression of sword and sorcery that's an attempt to take the genre forward. I actually have a tweet length description because I was like, I'm going to have to explain this a lot. So
yeah, no fair.
So
You've distilled them down to the basic components.
Yeah. So if I may, I will do a short, literally a tweet-length read here. So like I said, Sword and Sorcery, the classic thing across the whole history of it. I do recommend Brian Murphy's Flaming Crimson, The History of Sword and Sorcery, by the way, if you want to learn about it, make a TBR pile explode. I think I just said that again. Sorry, listeners. I just woke up and chugged a mug of tea and got on the podcast. The New Edge thing is how I define it. New Edge Sword and Sorcery takes the genre's virtues of its outsider protagonists, thrilling energy, wondrous weirdness, and a large body of classic tales, then alloys in inclusivity, mutual creator support, a positive fan community, and enthusiastic promotion of new works into the mix. And this is, I think, very important. I'm not going to be the only one doing this. There are other great magazines out there I want to give a shout out to quickly. Howard Andrew Jones edits Tales from the Magician's Skull. Lovely magazine, beautiful high quality paper and all that good stuff. Plus, the stories are good. I sound like a backhanded compliment. The paper's nice. No, great stories is a given if I'm bothering to mention them.
Lovely books with some terrible backing on them who fall apart. Yeah. It really ruins reading a novel. So there's a reason to have some good paper.
But good stories and art. Let's just make that clear. But yeah, it's actually published by a role-playing game company called Goodwin Games, and so there's this fun thing at the back of the magazine where you can get like D&D style statistics for the monsters and shit that you saw in the stories, which I think is a fun little twist.
That is cool.
But yeah, so they're like a high quality. In the vein of the old pulps kind of style magazine, great stuff, rollicking adventure, PG-13 by and large, so good for getting young ones into it. And then there's another one I would mention called Whetstone Magazine, amateur magazine of sword and sorcery. It's free, everybody, if you want to go check out Whetstone. It's a great place to try out new authors. It's a great place for new authors to try it out. They have a tight word count, 2,500 word roof, and it's just a great way for either experienced authors to just have a bit of a fuck about, try something different, why not, in a low stakes environment, or for people who want to try and get published. in this genre to give it a whirl. The editors are wonderful people. And the third one I mentioned is a brand new one. Actually, it just started recently. They've just opened the call of submissions for issue 2 called Old Moon Quarterly. With a bit more of a focus on the weird, as far as I can tell. I'm waiting to get my issue 1 in the mail, so I'll
I like that
later.
name. That's
Old Moon
a
Quarterly?
great name, actually. Old Moon Quarterly. I quite like that.
Yeah. No, so those are 3 other magazines. So my point in mentioning them, aside from just giving a shout out, remember what I just said, endorsing your fellow creators, right? It's part of the whole thing to me, the new Edge sort of movement, if you want to call it that. Which again, I have no control over, just the magazine. That's my domain. So they're doing great stuff. I'm not inventing, I'm adding. I'd like to say. And also, certainly, like I say, one of the things that sets the magazine apart, by and large, I would say, it's going to be released in all 3 formats. You're going to get EPUB, because I want it to be accessible to everybody, including those who don't have a lot of money to throw around. And in issue 0, EPUB will be free. So there's no excuse. If you want to check it out, grab a free
6 stories for free. That's pretty good. I like that.
Yeah, 6 stories, bunch of art, bunch of non-fiction articles about the genre, its history, its future. Yeah, I think that's pretty okay.
Man, you can stop twisting my arm. I'll read it.
But maybe you're thinking, I don't like EPUB. I don't like reading on screens any more than I have to. I do it all day at my job or whatever. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at sometimes. It's going to be released in softcover and hardcover at cost. At cost, and I've got to look up the numbers. I'm sorry, but at cost, means exactly to the penny what it costs to produce. So, I mean, it's going to be as low as humanly possible without taking a loss. Wow. We'll be doing that through Amazon Print on Demand, and then in the future issues, well, we're going to see how it gets printed in the future. The hope is to use issue 0 as a way of kind of getting everybody to check it out. Build a bit of hype. That will come out sometime in September. I don't want to be more specific because it's more important to me to make it good than to have it come out on the 1st. Right? If it's going to be if it's got to be October 1st, fuck it. But I mean, September's the goal. And then, I'm going to be pushing that as hard as I can, like I'm doing right now, to build hype and build our mailing list, which will go out. Mailing list. Oh, I don't want to get more email. Don't worry. It's going to be precisely 3 emails in 12 months. And the 3rd one might not even happen. It's going to be 1 email saying issue 0 is coming out. It's going to be a 2nd email saying, hey, guess what? There's a crowdfunder for the issues 1 and 2. Do you want to get in on that? And then there's going to be a 3rd email, assuming the crowdfunding succeeds, which I think it will, but saying, hey, guess what? The crowdfunder succeeded. You can buy issues 1 and 2 now. So voila. and if we keep going, it'll tell you about, issue 3 and 4. So that's it. Don't worry about spam or getting a weekly thing from a creator who's struggling to find something to say. I think we've all been on newsletters that kind of read that way. But yeah, so it's going to be in those formats, and the hardcover thing certainly I think sets it apart. I like the idea of a really nice artifact on your shelf, and I know there are lots of people out there who like that too.
You're speaking to the goblin brain of me at the moment, and I want that hardcover now.
The minute you said hardcover, it's like, God, I want that. That'll look so nice with all my other hardcover books and novels on my shelf.
Yeah. Right. And it's going to be, 8.5 by 11, nice big pages to show off the art. And so there'll be a nice big hardcover. And it's funny, I got the inspiration. I hadn't ever thought about a hardcover magazine, but I was visiting my folks and I looked over and went, Dad, what the hell are you doing with this? And I found he was using it as a mouse pad, a magazine from 1968 called Horizon. And it was hardcover. And I was like, what is this? Hardcover? What? And just opened it up and looked through. And I was like, we got to do this. We got to do this to make the magazine, part of making it stand out.
That is awesome.
Other things about the magazine. Oh.
Well, that first issue was a hand painted front as well. So the artwork you're getting for that.
Yep. Yeah. No, I really dig that, and I look forward to us going forward, not only pushing boundaries with again within the sort of the tent posts of Sword and Sorcery. Like this is actually brings me back to something I realized I said before we recorded and haven't said yet. Sword and Sorcery. One thing I really love about it is that you kind of know what it is once you get more familiar with the kind of the history, right? Which is again another reason to check out the old stuff. You read the contemporary stuff and you kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, actually I can kind of see. Like I say, outside of protagonists, magic is dark and dangerous and very rarely, if ever, has any kind of system to it. It is the fantastic. It's not like something someone uses to turn on a light bulb slightly differently. The characters tend to have personal and mercenary motivations. It's rare they're trying to save the kingdom. That's more heroic fantasy, right? As I say, the sort of horror Lovecraftian elements is you'll read some great horror stories that happen to be sword and sorcery at the same time. And in fact, it is a great genre for draping like a cape over other genres. Robert E. Howard, who created Conan, did that that all the time. He did Conan stories that were kind of pirate stories. He did Conan stories that if you kind of lifted the lid, you're like, wait a minute, this is like a cowboy frontier story. He did a Conan story that was like a locked room mystery. So again, really flexible, but you always know what it is. Sword and Sorcery can be so much and still be Sword and Sorcery. And God, doesn't that get you excited to go and explore it? It does me. It makes me want to write it, as well. And so, wonderful, wonderful genre. And so, New Edge is kind of, like I say, brings in the positivity kind of thing that I think we can always use more of, like I say, positive fan community. I hardly need to tell you about how we could use more of those. In general. Focus on mutual creator support, understanding that we're not crabs in a bucket. We can all help lift each other up, and that's one of the best ways to get somewhere. And that goes back to the dawn of the bloody thing. All kinds of Sword and Sorcery creators back in the 30s that have huge voluminous, books of letters that they sent to each other that people still love to study to get a better idea of what their deal was. And they're all lifting each other up. And then similarly the enthusiastic promotion of new material. I'm going to be giving ad space to all kinds of people in the magazine. Free ad space, let me stress that, who I think, I like your stuff, I want more people to know about it, even if I'm not having you in for a story in this issue. Maybe people can know about your book. Let's put
it's always a good thing. It's if they grow, then they will bring you up with them, kind of thing. It's if they benefit, you benefit. It keeps flowing around because they're not going to be uplifting, go, "Ha, fuck this guy," and then run away. In most cases, people are pretty decent. It's like, I came from here. Maybe check that out. It has other people that coming up. So definitely helps.
Exactly. And so, for me, the only real lines are, I don't want to promote people who are harassers. We all know people who love to get up to those kind of shenanigans, or I disagree with someone, I'll whip my Twitter following against them. Blair, who needs that? And people who are hateful, which, sometimes people get very worried about that. I say, I don't want to promote hate. And they go, well, what if that's judgment? What if he judges me? I don't want to be judged. It's like, I get it. But hate's real easy to spot. Does this person espouse views that make it clear they think some humans are less than human because what kind of human they are? Yes, no. If yes, fuck off. If no, don't worry about it. Like, that's it. Easy peasy. You think it was simple? But again, gestures at world we live in. So,
The world where Nazis came back. It's a bit weird.
Yeah. We all grew up watching them get punched out by Indiana Jones or whatever, and it's like, hey guys, we really were very clear about who the bad guys were for quite a while. Yeah. But anyway.
You're not clear when we melted their faces. Was it not that clear for you?
Yeah, where was the ambiguity? Yeah, exactly. So Exactly. So I think those two sort of little, caveats about including people are pretty straightforward and easy and not a big deal. And they help keep things decent, because if you want to expand things, you want to get more people in. Well, you can't have raging, misogynists charging around doing their thing if you want more women to read. You can't have TERFs charging around if you want to get trans people in there as creators and readers, and so on and so forth. It just makes sense. And so that kind of brings me around to the thing that, I mentioned earlier about how certainly with this magazine, I want to be very intentional about inclusivity and equity, diversity, all that kind of thing. I appreciate these can be kind of buzzwords people throw around just to try and pat themselves on the back and make themselves look good or whatever. And so a lot of people wary of looking like they're patting themselves on the back will say, well, I'm not going to talk explicitly about it. I'm just going to be cool, man. I'm just going to focus on good stories, and I'm not going to be a shithead about what people submit to me, editor of a magazine, I guess, in this hypothetical scenario I'm drawing. And you know what? I totally get it. It's not a bad attitude. I've been there myself. But if there's one thing I learned with my screenwriting experience, if I can tell a quick illustrative anecdote, it's that only takes care of you. Yeah, that only takes care of your side of the equation. If you are, and you don't have to be, I'm not telling anybody what to do here, but if you are like me and you want to try and do your little bit that you can with your little bit of power in the world to affect some positive change in this regard, then you need to be more intentional. Because if you only say, I'm going to just worry about good stories on my end, well, that's fine, that's good, that's one up from where you could be, but it doesn't take care or try to adjust for the wildly uneven world out there from which the authors are coming to you to submit. And so it's this kind of thing where, like, sure, you just focus on good stories, but how many people out in the world have access to the resources that can help them get to a place where they can tell good stories, where they can feel welcome coming to your magazine, not because you've done anything to make them feel unwelcome, but because maybe the scene as a whole looks extremely white and male and straight, and doesn't necessarily seem to be putting off any signals saying, well, hey, everybody else, get in here. You're great. You might be thinking it in your head, but maybe there's not a clear enough signals. And I've run into that. I mentioned earlier before the recording, I've spent the last half a dozen years volunteering as promotion for the world's largest, the Western Hemisphere's, careful Oliver, the Western Hemisphere's largest publicly accessible archive of speculative fiction, which has also greatly benefited my writing and reading, as you can imagine. And I've done events where I would put out a whole bunch of old used books and stuff from decades past as a way of selling them for pennies to help raise funds for the organization. And I would have a woman come up, of color, and look at our stuff and go, I just see a bunch of white guys. It doesn't seem like this is for me. And I go, shit, yeah, you're right. It doesn't look like that, does it? So it really, things like that kind of really made me think hard about it. And then I think over in the world of screenwriting, where like for the longest time, I'm going to be very fuzzy on the years here because that's not the point. For most of the history of film and television, yeah, for most of the history of film and television, if you read a screenplay and a character was introduced, it'd be like, in comes Bobby, age 36, hot but doesn't know it, blah blah blah, and it gets into the story. It doesn't tell you that Bobby's white because the default was white. It would tell you if Bobby was literally anything else. And of course, I don't think I need to explain why that's not great, because then it means that the default is white. We just think of everybody being white. All the movies are very white, and it's not very friendly to everybody else, right? And so about 10 odd years ago, something like that. A lot of people were saying this. I'm not inventing this. And a lot of people were going, yeah, maybe we should do something different. And so you've got a lot of people, and I was in this camp for a while, thinking, okay, you know what? You're right. That's a bad idea. I'm going to be colorblind. When I introduce my characters, I'm not going to say who anybody is. You just figure it out. Well, and it's like, okay, sounds good. And that's kind of the equivalent of, roughly speaking, no metaphor survives intense scrutiny, but that's roughly the equivalent of saying, I'm just going to worry about good stories. Right? Because it's saying I'm going to take, I'm just going to be like, cool, man, no boundaries, whatever, anybody come in, sounds great. But the problem with the screenplays was that we still were operating in a culture, the world at large, outside of the writer writing that screenplay, where white was the default. And so it didn't really solve the problem. And you would still get kind of cues by the names that you would give characters anyway, right? Or people's inherent biases, which maybe they haven't examined as much as they should. You might have a character who has a very, generic, i.e. white North American sounding name, but they're a cleaner. And then the casting agent goes, well, I mean, this protagonist is obviously white and this cleaner is obviously, Latinx or whatever. So you've got to go further. You've got to accommodate for the world outside of the writer, outside of the magazine editor, and be intentional. And so in screenwriting, what by and large I'm seeing these days for the last 5 years or so at least, is people naming everybody, including the white guys. Just be specific. That's it. And so in a similar vein, what I want to try and do with Edge Sword Sorcery is good stories are assumed. If you're in the magazine, you're in the magazine because I think you're, either a master of your craft, get on here, obvious what you've got to offer, or you're what you might call an emerging talent. And, maybe you're not a master yet, but you got to get there somehow. And you've got something about you that I think is really good. And I want to help you in the way I can through publishing, promotion, and when we get to issues 1 and 2 and beyond, paying you, which is bloody important, obviously. So yeah, absolutely. I am kind of what was that old meme that was doing the round a few years ago where people would go, this is the future liberals want. And it would just be like a really weird picture of someone wearing a unicorn costume riding a rocket or whatever. Yeah. I don't know. It'd just be just like a weird mishmash of just stuff that actually, when you think about it, sounds kind of cool, but it was supposed to be presented as a threat.
That looks like fun. Threaten me with a good time then. Okay.
Exactly. It would be awful if we could all pay for our healthcare and everybody was welcome. It's like, okay, bring it on. And in that vein,
how terrible would it get every education? Oh my God, how terrible would the world be?
Can you imagine a world without lawyers?
Yeah. Well, there you go. And so in that vein, I was sitting down with a notebook because I'm already fantasizing about who I'm going to have for issues 1 and 2, obviously. I mean, I'm bringing back people from issue 0, bless them, because I like them and I like working with them. I've done most of the stories, which is why I say past tense. Most of the stories are already into proofing. But also I was thinking about filling out the rest of the roster. And I thought, well, I want to be intentional about this. I want to try and bring in as many people from as many different groups as I can. So yeah, literally I was sitting there going, okay, well, all right, we've got a queer author here. We've got this author there. And I thought about it and I was like, shit, this is exactly what some people hate the idea of, isn't it? But it's like, but it's sincere because it's still like, again, good author, good story assumed. It's not, there's this nonsense people go on about with the diversity hire or whatever. It's not a substitute. Again, remember what I said earlier about false choices, false binaries, it's parallel. It's another thing I'm considering. And I want to be thinking about it intentionally so that I can make sure that I don't fall ass backwards unintentionally creating saying, I want to make a magazine that helps grow the audience and helps grow the variety of audience and authors and creators. and then have it be like 5 white guys and 1 woman. So because it's so easy to just go with the best of intentions, but if you're not, like I say, being intentional, he said, tapping his head. You can't see that, listener. You might accidentally create something that's not really what you were going for. Anyway, I just tore on for 20 minutes or whatever. So sorry.
Yeah,
no, it was
like
fine.
Interesting.
The floor was really good.
It wasn't interesting. I mean, it's really good hearing that you're putting this much thought into all the elements of the magazine. It's not just, I've found 6 randos and I like the stories. You're putting a lot more than just that into it. And I really like the sound of that personally. I've read many magazines and book sets and things where it's pretty clear people didn't think much beyond, I made a thing. Whereas you're already thinking ahead to that, like, can I expose some readers to some different stuff, some other perspectives that may bring them interesting stories and worlds they'd have never thought of just because they may not have ever thought to look for that type of author. It's so refreshing and interesting to hear you so passionately put that forward.
Like, I'm keen for new takes on things or new varieties. I am actually very hyped for this now, which is going to be interesting.
Good, I'm doing my job. All right, good. And yeah, and honestly, like I obviously feel very strongly about it, the sort of diversity, equity, inclusion side of it, which is also one other aspect of that I'll mention, then I'll move on, is also, I'm still wording it because it's careful, but I'm going to make a point of putting it in probably in the table of contents or somewhere, right up front with the magazine. Sort of a statement oh God, I'm sorry again, listeners, it's early, I've just had a big mug of tea, I'm trying to get the brain working, but like, an inclusion statement basically just makes explicitly saying that, everyone's welcome here, except the people who think some humans aren't human because they're less, whatever. It's everyone's welcome. And you might think, well, why you got to put that in there? I brought that up in some circles, and some people say, well, why you got to put that in there? Just focus on the good stories. Why you got to put that in there? And I said, well, I mean, it's not the main event. It's not the reason the magazine exists solely. It's if you want to, again, go to lazy metaphors, if the magazine was a restaurant, it's not the big neon sign on top of it saying burgers, right? That's the burgers, the stories, right? That's what gets people to come off the highway, come on in. What it is to me is a little sticker by the door saying whatever governing body, because you're Australian, I'm Canadian, and I'm thinking of Americans because Canadians think too much about America.
It's the more than their own country. Poster, basically.
Right. But it's like the little sticker you have by the door from the Food and Drug Association or whatever, just saying, by the way, the kitchen's hasn't got any rats in it. Like it's safe in here. Good stuff. Come on in. That's what it is to me, and it's an important little sticker to have on there. It's not the main event by far, but you want to have that little sticker saying, hey, everybody's welcome here, and that's a part of how we do things, because the cost of choosing wrongly, or choosing poorly, or choosing naively and going whoops and wandering in, not knowing you're going into a place with rats in the kitchen, so to speak, can be really rough on people who aren't us, who aren't, white straight cis boys, wandering into fan communities, right? And it can lead to all kinds of trouble for you, and just unpleasant experiences, even if it's just going in and reading something really offensive and then going, ugh, fuck, shit, that's not what I came here for, and going off feeling a bit wobbly because, that may have reminded you of unfortunate things you've had to deal with in your day-to-day living. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not perfect. I will never claim to be perfect. I have no doubt I will continue to be learning how to do things better, including this side of the magazine as I go forward. But to me, it's an important thing, but it's just another challenge, like figuring out layout. Like figuring out the editing relationship with the authors, because I've been a professional. You can pay me, listener. You can hire me. I've been a professional editor for a while. Helping people one-on-one with their stories, mostly developmental editing, like the story stuff, as opposed to copy. It's not the same. Doing it as an editor of a magazine, working with a sort of stable of authors and having to sort of think about how that goes. So that's been a kind of interesting voyage of discovery as well. And so this is my point, right? The diversity, equity, inclusion thing, I'll get off this in a sec, is just another facet. Don't get too in your head about it. Think about it carefully, the same way I'm going to be thinking real carefully about layout of the magazine. I want it to look good. I want it to be a beautiful object you hold in your hand or tablet, whatever. I want the stories to be really good. I want to not have, come back to what you were saying, Seth, a minute ago about thinking about like the variety and some anthologies that I think we've all read. It can be as simple as saying, talking to the authors before going into the issues and saying, okay, guys, what are your premises? Before you go off and write several thousand words, what's yours? Oh, you're doing a tomb robbing story. Great. Okay. I'm going to make sure we don't have like 3 of those, like a potluck pile up, right? We don't want to get this anthology of all this great variety. Open up half of it's chili. I talking about the food. Have I had breakfast? But yeah.
It's the
You
tea
get,
picking.
so this is what I mean about it's the same thing. I'm being intentional about, what kind of stories in that regard. I'm being intentional about the art. I want to get a decent variety. Certainly from issue 1 forward, where I'll be able to pay people that have a bit more intentionality about that aspect. I love old pulp style art. I love the covers, by and large, that you see from the 60s and 70s and early 80s before we get into kind of a tradition that currently is mostly like put a sword on the cover with a fuzzy wuzzy CGI background, done. I get why that comes about. I think it's largely to do with a mixture of, I would say ill-advised penny pinching by publishers, but also what works well as a little thumbnail on Amazon, right? Think about that. Think about how the thumbnails
things to be shrunk down.
Look back to those old, like the one I know most is more that old sort of Conan stuff. Some of that old Conan artwork,
Frank Frazetta.
That shit is just stick it on a wall. It's ready to go. It doesn't even have to be on a book to just be beautiful.
Or stick it on the side of a van, as many people did in the 70s. And some people still love that tradition, van art.
I still love the old vans. Oh, they're beautiful.
They're wonderful.
It's really great hearing you want to put go back to that sort of you want that strong, striking art. Give me goosebumps thinking about it.
Yeah, well, in part, right? Because it's here's the thing, okay? You've got that classic tradition. And then you've also got another thing that you see a lot in the Sword and Sorcery scene right now, which is kind of grown out of the role-playing game, sort of seeing sideways. I don't know if you or your listeners are familiar with the concept of the old OSR, sort of the old school revolution. It was this thing that came about in the early 2000s where people weren't very happy with the then latest edition of D&D, and they were like, let's go back to the stuff from the late 70s, early 80s. And a lot of that had to do with also the visual style of the art, which was far less computer colored and perfect sort of photorealistic figures and faces, and a lot more just wild experimental DIY kind of thing. That also is an aesthetic you will find elsewhere. I would say the Wet Zone Magazine's covers, for example, tend to be something in that vein. And I love that. I love that too. And there's elements of both of that in issue 0, and I have no doubt there will continue to be elements of that in issues going forward. But what I want to do is like I said, I don't want to throw anything out. I just want to do something new as well and have a mix, right? And so 100%. I'm going to have elements of this for sure. But I also want to really get experimental going forward with the art. Too, and see what different things are out there, because by God, we live in a golden age of finding interesting art online. And I just think, if you have one specific aesthetic that your publication is all about, more power to you. Love it. Again, I'm not crapping on anybody. I'm just talking about what I want to do. And what I want to do with this is definitely honor and carry forward and remix the classics. But I also want to do new stuff. I want to try and push new stuff. And so I'm looking at some artists for future issues. I'm getting very excited about who I might be able to get when I have, what is it called, money to pay people. Makes things a little easier. And I want to really push things. Coming back around to some of the other stuff I was mentioning, I'm dying. I've got a few people in mind, so fingers crossed I can get one of them at least. I'm dying to get more trans authors involved with Sword and Sorcery, because I think the outsider hero aspect of it is incredibly ripe for more, LGBTQ plus representation, right? I mean, talk about people who, alas, tend to be on the outside of things still currently. And I just love the idea of how in Sword and Sorcery stories, almost uniformly, the heroes succeed, or protagonists, I should say. They're not always heroic. Sometimes they're bastards, to be honest, and sometimes they die at the end. But anyway, so again, more variety. But they almost always are in a bad place in a way in the big picture of things because of who they are and who people tell them they are. Oh, you're a barbarian, of course, the most classic one. And it's like, fuck you, I'm going to succeed because of who I am, not in spite of it. And I'm going to tell you who I am. You're not going to tell me who I am. This is a real spine of a lot of these stories, a lot of these heroes that, even as a guy who's faced no difficulties for his, sort of intersection of demographics and identity. I mean, I'm not rich. That'd be nice. I suppose that's one privilege I don't have. Thanks, Mum and Dad. Could have been rich. Anyway, but aside from that, I've been playing on easy mode, and still, I find I really identify with that. I really like it. Perhaps because being a classic, bullied nerd as a kid, right? There's our gateway drug for a lot of us.
Yeah, we were all hunted for sport when we were kids.
right. And now we've taken over, so here we are. And so I just think, my God, I want to read a trans author writing a trans sword and sorcery hero, telling people, fuck you, I am who I am, and I'm going to succeed because of who I am. And I want to get a trans artist in there. I want to do, I've got this image I'd love to commission, which is like, kind of like a classic Frank Frazetta as the artist you were thinking of, Seth, with the Conan covers that are why, honestly, they're as responsible as Howard's writing. And the editors, Lynn Carter and Elsbreg de Camp, who published the Lancer paperbacks in the 60s with that art. Like, that's where, that's why we got the movie, that's why we got the comics, everything all came out of those paperbacks in a way. And Frazetta's cover art. I want to do something kind of like one of a classic Frazetta piece, have a classic, muscular, powerful, dynamically posed barbarian fella standing on top of a pile of bodies he's vanquished, and there's thunder and cloud in the sky, and he's reaching up to the gods as if to challenge them, say fuck you. And you see, and like a lot of SNS, there's a lot of flesh and a lot of sword and sorcery, right? A lot of bodies, not just the women. Frank Frazetta in particular hated pants. You want to see some ass cheeks clapping, men, women, orcs, doesn't matter. Go to Frank Frazetta. Anyway, so egalitarianism, right? You can have a bit of sex appeal, just be equal about it, Get those orc cheeks clapping, in his Tolkien art. Look at Frank Frazetta's Tolkien art. It's hilarious, but also very good. And anyway, so you have this figure, bare-chested, standing on top of the bodies, and, crying to the skies. And if you look carefully, they've got a lot of different scars because they fight. They're like when Batman takes off his shirt and you see all the evidence of all his battles. And amongst those scars, you might see sort of pictorial scars. Oh, this is a trans man who's had, the bosoms removed as a part of becoming more, who they really know they are to be. Fuck, I want to have that. Anyway,
God,
that's just an example of what I mean
awesome.
about pushing.
I am not gonna lie.
Yeah,
didn't realize that's something I wanted until you said it out loud. Like, oh no, I do want this. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is part of why I'm very excited, because I'll tell you, just in little chats here and there, forums and so on, when I start mentioning this shit, people go, fuck yeah, I want that. And I think, okay, I'm going to do my best to give it to you. So.
Okay, well,
sorry, I'm trying to shut up for a sec so you can.
We've been up this for a good 40 minutes now. So, is there any other questions?
I'll do it.
Anyone else has got? Swoosh, John Doe.
No. Or just like you mentioned like before we were talking on here, like you said, sword and sorcery sort of had a bit of a slump and then a bit of a rise again through the 60s and 70s. And like, like for me looking at it, a lot of some of that can be associated with like the growth of Dungeons and Dragons at the time. And that also helped shape how people's view of the sword and sorcery sort of world.
Well, actually, there's something called. Sorry.
Just how people view the world around them and how like they view the sword and sorcery world. Like myself, when I think about it, I always seem to go back to almost like a medieval time. Like for me, it was more that time than it was for Conan, and I related Dungeons and Dragons a lot to that. And so when I think of sword and sorcery, that's almost immediately what I go back to. And just how that's shaped a lot of sort of the public's view of it, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. You're right. And there's a deep irony. There's a deep irony to that, because there is something called the Appendix N reading list. You will find this list of authors and works in the back of the 1979 Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Game Masters book, if I remember correctly. Give it a Google. I'm sure I'm getting that slightly wrong. And it's a list of authors that Gary Gygax, along with Dave Arneson, right, the co-creator of D&D, lists as his inspiration when coming up with the game. And it is, and there's other people there who I wouldn't call sword and sorcery, like good old Tolkien, right? Or Lovecraft, who was a sword and sorcery adjacent with his weird horror. But otherwise, it's just an absolute rogues gallery of all the authors you'd want to read who did sword and sorcery from the 30s onward, and Conan absolutely is in the mix. But the irony is that in D&D, you get a game, right? A game where there was other stuff mixed in as well, Tolkien, to the point that they called them hobbits. They weren't halflings. That was copyright infringement that made them switch them to halflings. And then D&D blows up in the early 80s with its extremely codified, everything has to be very clearly defined view of things, because again, it's a game. I'm not criticizing, but I play it myself. But but yeah, very codified. And so this absolutely, you're right, played into people's view of fantasy right? Because sword and sorcery is a distinct subgenre, and I do not say that as a gatekeeper. I say that as someone who understands that you have to draw some lines, because if you don't have any, you just have a blank page. You've got nothing. You've got to define roughly what it is, even if the boundaries are very elastic. Like I say, sword and sorcery is its own specific subgenre with its own wonderful history that absolutely got diluted, in part, I think, because you got D&D that came along, blew up, shaped how everybody saw fantasy. People started writing novels based on the D&D stuff. You know, there was even the first one that was ever commissioned. What's it called? Quag Keep, written by Andre Norton, the very first book ever, listener, about a bunch of kids are playing D&D and they get sucked into the world. Oh no, adventure. So if you want a bit of history, go back and read that. The very first time that was ever done, it was commissioned, if I remember correctly, by Gygax. And Andre Norton is a great author of Sword and Sorcery, as well as its kind of like sister genre Sword and Planet, which is kind of like John Carter of Mars, you know, sort of a lone human winds up on an alien world, and it's kind of a weird mix of very alien high tech and like low tech swords and loincloths and stuff. Anyway, it got highly codified. It made, you know, everybody's elves look the same, everybody's dwarves look the same, where there were slight variations. There's a magic system because there's got to be a rule system in the game, and so on and so forth. And I was growing up, you know, late 80s, early 90s, through that decade into the 2000s. I was reading Savage Sword of Conan magazine, which was still being printed then, and that luckily gave me, I tripped over that and was like, oh, what's this? This is different, because I personally bounced off of Tolkien. Later I came back to it and really appreciated The Hobbit, but I really bounced off this highly codified thing where the fantastic is very much explained. I really like where the fantastic is fantastic. It's very strange and weird, and there's no guarantees. And because something worked this way one time, no guarantee it's going to work that way another time. And reader, if you're thinking, oh, well, that just sounds like the author can do anything. I mean, that's not fair. There's got to be rules. Well, the author can do anything and still make it interesting and not feel it like you've got a bunch of Deus Ex Machinas dropping on your head when you get to the finale. There's a way, like with anything, to do it with skill and to make you feel like you're going into a sort of a re-wondered world almost, you know, bring back that sense of wonder, which is not just positive, happy things. It can be the wonder of a weird and terrible place. You know, Clark Ashton Smith, one of the classic fellas, did a wonderful job with that incredible world building, but a very different kind of world building. It wasn't an exhaustive encyclopedia. It was more inferring with little glimpses and peaks and drop names without telling you, you know, precisely what the thing is. You know, monsters and all that kind of weirdness would tend to be something like, you know, oh, the weird and terrible description. Anyway, you figure it out. It wouldn't be like, and here's some goblins. You know how many hit points they have. You know what goblins do. You know, I, as you can tell from the way I say it, I've enjoyed that other stuff, but this is my preference. Obviously, it would have to be. Why am I doing the magazine otherwise? So yeah, that was the problem, right? Is that Sword and Sorcery kind of, you know, at the same time that the publishing kind of sort of started to come apart because it had become a bit stale and repetitive. A lot of people didn't want to keep changing and evolving with the times. And then we got the codification of fantasy in D&D, which ironically was fed into greatly by Sword and Sorcery. And if you go to the Appendix N reading list, you'll find all kinds of great stuff there related to it. And in fact, a quick shout out to the Appendix N Book Club podcast, where they worked their way in the first 100 episodes, and now they're going a bit further afield. They worked their way through that reading list, talking about the books in the first half and then the gamification of them in the back half. Anyway, the great guys. So that's my long ass answer. Yes, you're right, Dan. 10 points. And so that's partly what I think the idea of the new edge thing is, to try and push back against that by saying, you know, okay, what's the new edge? All right, we're going to sharpen this thing. We're going to knock off the dirt, you know, the old attitudes and the dilution of the term, and say, look, Sword and Sorcery is a specific thing, but it's a very flexible thing, and it's not D&D, and it's not Lord of the Rings. Sorry?
Redefine it back as its own subgenre kind of thing, because it's like subgenres in music. There's rock, there's old rock, there's, you know, new age, that kind of stuff, and we're fine with those kinds of, you know, separations. So this should be the same with writing and literature.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the same as like going to a bookshop and there's fantasy and sci-fi, and that's all you get. And that's like, why are fantasy and sci-fi always linked together? They're two very different things, and even within that, you get so many different variations of fantasy, so many different variations of sci-fi. Like, if you look in every other section of a bookshop, they're all broken down into a little more bracketed sections than just
depth.
This and this. So I'm very looking forward
and
to
funny
it.
enough,
This is how it works.
Right. And funny enough, Dan, I mean, that also comes back to the pulps and all that kind of stuff with the Appendix N reading list, because a big part of the fun of reading practically any fantasy and science fiction from before the early 80s-ish is, especially going back to those weird magazines, the pulps and stuff in the 30s, you'll find that people's lines between fantasy and science fiction are way blurrier. It is kind of all one big playground to a lot of authors. And you might have something that sounds goofy in summation, but like a wizard showing up on a rocket or whatever, you know? You might have, like I say, Sword and Planet, which, as I mentioned, is this kind of like step brother to Sword and Sorcery, that it absolutely blends sci-fi with a kind of antediluvian or ancient, you know, sort of setting, seemingly. Yeah, you can, again, that flexibility, you know when you get that feeling, you know, reading it, but flexibility. Whereas now, yeah, we got like, you know, what's fantasy over here and sword, sci-fi over there. Fantasy is bloody anything with a sword and a wizard in it. Sci-fi is anything with a fucking ray gun. I don't care. I'm just trying to sell books. I'm a publisher. I'm a book owner. A bookstore owner, or whatever. But then, as you say, you go to the specialist proper stores. You know, like in Toronto, we've got a great one called Back of Phoenix. They've been doing great sci-fi and fantasy selling for years, and you get it broken down. You get the you know, recommendations of the staff and stuff, and it's so much better. And the nice thing is online, you have to trip over it. You have to promote it, maybe on a podcast. But yeah, we also have the giant bookstore that is the internet, and we can find not only the bookstore cats in great number, but you can find the subgenres and understand what makes them special and makes them stand out, and get to read something a little different than this kind of big mash that we run into in like the big name bookstores.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to need to start bringing things to a close for this recording. Is there anything you'd like to hit right here at the end, Oliver? You got the spotlight.
Yeah, I mean, I just, you know, like I say, I really want to support my fellow, you know, magazines out there. Like I said, while you're waiting for issue 0 to come out, go look up Tales from the Magician's Skull, Whetstone magazine, amateur magazine of Sword and Sorcery, free. Check out Old Moon Quarterly. First issue just went up on Amazon this morning. You can get that in EPUB and softcover, if I remember correctly. So check out those lovely people. Check out the scene. You know, Whetstone magazine. Honestly, so much of the work that went into my magazine came out of discussions with people, and pretty much all the authors, but one that are in the thing came from the Whetstone Tavern Discord. I wasn't really into Discord for a while. I couldn't quite figure out how to work it in a way that I liked. And then I tripped over this place and I check it like 38 times a day. That has become quickly my favorite place online. Speaking of positive, supportive fan community where, you know, people who are hateful are not welcome. Yeah, great place to go and chat and get to chat with all kinds of people, including the editors of some of these magazines. All 3 magazines, actually, and me. Oh, you can talk to me. So yeah, there's that. And then otherwise, I just really want to hammer home New Edge Sword and Sorcery. By the time this episode is up, that website should be working. It'll be very simple to start because it's right now pushing the mailing list, so you can be alerted when the magazine comes out. And down the road, if you still want to be, you can always unsubscribe. But down the road, if you want to be, you'll be told about the crowdfunding for issues 1 and 2, which I'm already super pumped for because I'm getting near the end of being done issue 1, right? So you're always looking ahead as an editor. And you can find us on Twitter, on Instagram. You know, there's a Facebook community called New Edge Sword and Sorcery, but that's not the magazines. That's sort of a broad, like, let's discuss this thing in general. Yeah, good. Yeah, you'll see the magazine discussed there, but that's a more broad, you know, community thing. Find us on them socials, folks. Easy enough to find. Otherwise, I think the only thing I didn't mention about the magazine is it will be kind of R-rated. Now, I don't mean edgelord nonsense. I mean, again, boundaries. There'll be room. So there will be some, heavy-duty gore if the artist chooses to indulge in that. The one piece of art I've released actually shows the hero. He wanted to kill this wizard he's dealing with, and so he knocks the guy down and rides him like a sled down the side of a mountain, and like cheese graters him on the sides of the mountain. It's wonderful, wonderful art.
You already had this, but now we're in completely.
Yeah. No, I love a bit of the gonzo. You know, I don't. Again, variety of flavors, not every story, but this is a great gonzo moment. When I was reading the first draft, for editing, I was like, "Shit, that's the art. Easy choice. That's got to be the illustration." Wizard sledding, and so yeah, you'll see that art done by Morgan King, director of an amazing rotoscoped animated sword and sorcery film called Spine of Night. Shout out to that. You'll see that art at newedgeswordsorcery.com. And that gives you an idea that, yeah, if the story calls for it, yeah, we're going to have some gore and have a bit of fun with that. If the story calls for it, we might have, not in this issue currently, but in future issues, potentially, a bit of romance, a bit of sexy content. But always trying to keep in mind a variety of audiences, not just, your straight men looking at, women's asses or whatever. Because I've done that, but I don't want it to be the only thing. I want to think about everybody who might be reading. So a variety of sort of romantic, sexy content might be in there, and the story might not have any of it. Again, variety. So that's kind of the boundaries of the magazine as far as that side of things goes, in case you're thinking about, do I want to give this to my kid? Honestly, I saw all that stuff in magazines by the time I was 12, and I think I turned out okay.
Yeah.
But of course, that's up to any given parent to make their own judgment call. So yeah, otherwise, EPUB softcover, hardcover, issue 0 free, soft and hard EPUB's free, soft and hardcover at cost, very few dollars. We'll figure it out by September. Going to be out sometime in September, but please sign up on the mailing list, especially because the size of the mailing list, I'll spare you the editor behind the scenes stuff. The size of the mailing list plays a very big role in deciding whether or not we end up crowdfunding issues 1 and 2. So please sign up for that if you want to say I'm interested, and tell your friends to sign up for it. All right, I could talk forever, as you know, but there we go.
Well, thank you very much for coming on to the show with us tonight, Oliver. It's been an absolute pleasure. I think that's it for us for this little bonus episode. You all have a good one out there.
People on your mailing list.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, please do. Put that link in the show notes, he said, badgering the people who are very kindly helping him.
As long as we have all of your links, we'll put everything we can.
And it will go in the show notes of the main episode for this week as well. Do not worry about that. If I wasn't excited about this just from talking to you before this recording, I'm doubly so now.
Yeah. So we're definitely in, and we hope to have you back at some point soon.
I would love to, and thank you so much for having me on, giving me this chance to tell the people what's up, and to the people, why would I want to do that? To you, individual, dear listener, not an amorphous blob, thank you for listening to me talk about this, and I hope you check out the magazine.
And you too, you amorphous
Y'all
blob.
have a good one.
Have a good one.
Yeah, the gelatinous cube audience. Yeah.
It's a big audience. It just keeps on growing.
Yeah.